My name's Rod Swigard, and after the first tape, I would suspect that the board of directors of Berkshire Hathway understands who I represent, and that's the Nielsen boys from West Point, Nebraska. What I'm going to talk about is the saga of Don Nielsen and the 220,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway that we feel that are owned by the boys. Well, at least half of them. But they could own them all by the time we're done, and probably more. And we're going to explain that because it appears that you guys aren't listening. And plus, this will give you kind of a scenario of how I picked all this stuff up. In the 1950s and 1960s, Warren Buffett set up a variety of partnerships under the name of Buffett Partnership Ltd. There were 90 partners, of which Don Nielsen was one of them. Don Nielsen worked at the Amical station on 30th and Dodge in Omaha as a manager trainee. Mr. Buffett lived 4 blocks from the Amical station. According to Don's own words, he got his investment in Buffett $1 at a time. That's an interesting statement. For right now, we're just going to leave that one lie, because as they say, it's always good to leave dogs lie out in the ditch once in a while. In 1970, Warren Buffett decided to liquidate his partnerships, named Buffett Partnerships Ltd. Under the liquidation, he had 3 options to choose from: cash, shares in an insurance company, or shares in Berkshire Hathaway. Don Nielsen took 50,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway, according to Don's own words. Now you guys wonder how we know that Mr. Buffett is lying? Who do we believe, Mr. Buffett or Don? Well, Don had no reason to say that he had 50,000 shares. And after about 4 or 5 more meetings, and the discussion was how are we going to hide him from the kids, it was real interesting. I believed him. He had 50,000 shares at least. In 1973, Don was running his fuel business in West Point, Nebraska. It's a very, very profitable during the oil embargo, and Don Nielsen was prepaying an inventory ahead each year to take care of his growing income tax problem. After a discussion with Warren Buffett, they came up with an idea to take care of Don's growing income tax problem and Warren's growing need for money to expand his investment business. Don acquired 100,000 shares of National Indemnity for $43 a share, which is $4,300,000. This was swapped for 100,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway Class A stock. Then one day before the transfer of the money, OBH Inc. was set up in Delaware. Well, actually, the old OBH Inc. was just a DBA name. The real name was Hathdale. Now, we had to figure that out later on, and we didn't know it at the time, but the real name is Hathdale. The 100,000 shares just acquired was put into Hathdale, which is the legal name, DBA Berkshire Hathaway, along with Don Nielsen's original 50,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway. So now Don has a total of 150,000 shares of, well, I said OBH Inc. Well, actually it was Hathdale. Boy, isn't this confusing? Yeah, it got me confused too for a while, till I finally figured out there's a legal name and there's a DBA name. Now that's why I got a DBA name too, called Mr. Rain Man. Oh, this is going to be really funny now. Don Nielsen has a total of 150,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway Class A stock. Of course, back then, it wasn't Class A. It was just plain Berkshire Hathaway stock. Whoa, that's a lot of shares, isn't it? But that's only 150. In 1974, the above swap worked so well that another 50,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway Class A stock was acquired in the same manner. National Indemnity, 50,000 shares. Berkshire Hathaway stock, 50,000 shares. OBH Inc. Oh, that's right. That's the DBA name. Oh, that's right. The DBA name before that was Berkshire Hathaway. Oh, my God, I just can't believe it. But if you really want to sit down and keep it straight, just remember that Hathdale is the legal corporation. The DBA name had started with Berkshire Hathaway, and in 1996 they switched the DBA name to OBH Inc. Now you got the picture? Well, it's confusing, but now Don has a total of 200,000 shares, a holding company equal to 200,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway Class A. From 1974, and I believe at that point, after that point, Mr. Buffett says to Don, you got 200,000 shares for crying out loud, and I helped you get it. And it wasn't quite technically, oh my gosh, was it tax evasion? But I don't know if I want to say that word or not, because that's exactly, I think it was. Because if you clean up money through corporations and you turn around and don't report the tax and he takes the deduction on his return and then turns around and ends up with stock that nobody knows about, well, that's why you've been hiding it. You got the picture now? Well, that's kind of how this game is played. Luckily, in 1974, I just want to let you know, I was in college. All right, guys. From 1974 to 1990, Don Nielsen acquired about 20,000 shares of Berkshire Hathway by various means of purchasing. The usual way was writing checks to SunTrust Bank and deducting the checks as propane or fuel. Another way had to deal with a $3 million life insurance policy as a result of Barb Nielsen's death. This check was run down by the Nebraska Department of Insurance to SunTrust Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. The check was to go to the Nielsen boys. And how Don pulled that off, but was diverted by Don Nielsen to acquire more, what? OBH Inc., Berkshire Hathaway, or Hathdow, whatever you want to call it. However, how they were able to do that is he told Dwayne, his youngest son, who's the personal representative for the estate of Barb Nielsen, he was going to be the good old father. And whatever stuff that comes in for the estate, he'll send it on to Dwayne. Except that when the checks came, he turned around and took over the checks. There was 37 different checks that he turned around and got from insurance companies and investment companies and various other deals. None as big as the $3 million check. Of course, at that point, Mrs. Nielsen really thought that's what the big deal was. $3 million. Well, it would have been. The boys should have gotten $1 million apiece. But of course, Dad turns around. What's he do? He turns around and gets hold of the check. It gets cashed up in Minneapolis at Wells Fargo. And does that ring a bell? Who owns Wells Fargo? Oh my God, it's Berkshire Hathaway. And then it goes down to SunTrust Bank. SunTrust Bank was Warren Buffett's first bank that was used to fund acquisitions in the beginning. With Buffett Partnership Ltd. around 1957. Of course, they're still using that bank. The above trail of ownership is about 220,000 shares of Berkshire Hathaway Class A, give or take 1,000 shares either direction, because it could be more, could be less. But am I close? Close enough that everybody knows we're right on point of what happened, and everybody's trying to figure out how we figured it out. And that happened to was pointed out in a website by Berkshire Hathaway in 1995. It is now time to bring the pieces together with Berkshire Hathaway and the attempt to hide the shares from the Nielsen boys by Don Nielsen, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. Well, should I start adding Hamlin, the CPA, who's the treasurer, Trotter, who's the secretary and the attorney? And I'm sorry, Mr. Scott, you're a nice man in Omaha, but you are in on the list too now, because guess who your